The commission was asked by the city council, led by Councilmember Reed's office, and we have someone from Councilmember Reed's office as well as Councilmember Jenkins, to review the Oakland police pursuit policy, which is a critical policy for almost any police department, and police departments all over the Bay Area as well as the nation are looking at police pursuit policy. It's critical balance between apprehension and threats to folks' lives from pursuit. So it's something that we want to carefully do. The community ad hoc for the commission was asked to conduct this review, and a part of that review is this forum with the presentation from the police department as well as from the Inspector General's office. That will be followed by another meeting of the community ad hoc, where we will finalize our report to the commission that will eventually be sent to the city council for their early September meeting. In that next community ad hoc meeting, we hope to talk to North Carolina professor who wrote a book on pursuit policy, and we have the understanding was involved in writing Oakland's policy to kind of deepen our review of Oakland's policy. So this is a huge job that we're trying to take on, and a big important part of it is, of course, the community's understanding and appreciation of the policy and comments on the policy, other than just our representation of the community on the commission. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. We also want to thank Isaiah Hurtado from the 85th Avenue Library for their assistance in helping us to set this up. And I want to particularly also thank Micah Montgomery, Chief of Staff of the Commission, for all of the huge work that she did in coordinating all of this in order to make it happen. What we thought we would do tonight is that we would start with a presentation from the Oakland Police Department on exactly what our pursuit policy is, and the ins and outs of it, the evolution of it, some of the issues that are involved with it, and then have a presentation from Joseph McCullough from the Inspector General's office, who will be making a presentation on comparing Oakland's policy to the pursuit policy of other comparable cities. And I think that's very important and an important part of the review. So I'm gonna now turn this over to Sergeant Gabriel. Please not hope I'm pronouncing that right. Layden, who is going to take the lead and allow Sergeant Gabriel to introduce the other officers who are involved.
Yeah. Take the podium.
Yeah. Let me know when you're ready for me to share the presentation on the big screen for everyone on Zoom and here.
Yeah, I think we could probably
Put it up now? Okay.
Please bear with me if I have said something like this. My name is Sergeant Gabriel Akiza. I am a sergeant with the Oakland Police Department. I've been with the department since about 2014. Worked in a variety of roles: patrol, community resource officer, crime reduction team. Eventually went into ceasefire, and then I started working on policy. So I do a lot of our policy work now. I did as an officer, got promoted, went back to patrol, worked my way back into the what is now the crime reduction team. And then I still work with the crime reduction team and ceasefire. But I have moved back into the role of working a lot with policy and then working with our operations. And then I guess one of the most important things about me is that I'm born and raised in Oakland. So most of the people that I care about, my family still lives here. So when I talk about the community and talk about the danger to the community, like I feel that it's not something, I don't take this uniform off and go somewhere else. I'm always going to be here. And I think that kind of educates my perspective on some of these things. I'm also here with Captain Perez Angeles and Captain Osmus. Is the Area 2 captain, and Captain Perez is the captain for SOD, where our CRT East team, one of our more proactive teams, is located. So this is to be a general overview of what the actual policy is, some of the statistics related to pursuits, and then we can open it up to questions after. I think we're going to let us, why'd you go first? We can go to the first slide. So I try not to read off of slides as much as possible, but when it's related to policy, I try to be exact. So some of this will be verbatim. So this is from basically the value statement of the policy, but kind of gives an overview of what the perspective is for the department. So the primary consideration when deciding to engage in a pursuit is the protection of human life, and the overall safety of the community. We understand that vehicle pursuits are inherently dangerous, but at times it may be necessary to apprehend individuals who are involved in dangerous criminal activity that harms the community and who elect to attempt to evade apprehension by fleeing inside of a vehicle. So this will be a theme throughout the policy and then kind of throughout pursuits is just this balance. Basically, we're trying to weigh the balance of the potential danger that a pursuit can pose by continuing versus the potential danger of letting somebody go and not getting them in custody at that time. And then generally, the department policy only allows for pursuit of vehicles related to violent, forcible crimes and/or crimes involving the possession of a firearm. And I'll go into that a little bit further later in the presentation. So when a pursuit may be initiated. So when there's reasonable suspicion to believe a person committed a violent, forcible crime and/or a crime involving a firearm, or where there's probable cause that a person is in possession of a firearm. What that means is reasonable suspicion that a vehicle was involved in a robbery. Maybe a robbery occurs, a vehicle description is presented. Say it's a white Toyota Camry, newer model. The officer sees that vehicle in the same area where the robbery occurred. The vehicle is consistent with the description and appears to be casing for another robbery. That would probably provide the officer reasonable suspicion that that vehicle was involved, may be involved in that robbery. And a pursuit, in theory, could be initiated if they attempt to conduct enforcement and the vehicle then flees. Probable cause for something like a firearm would be an officer sees a subject with a firearm get into a vehicle, or there's video of a subject with a firearm who then gets in a vehicle and they attempt to do a stop in the vehicle and flees. Those circumstances, I mean, there's a lot of different circumstances that could happen, but those are just kind of examples of what that actually looks like. While officers are involved in a pursuit and even before initiating a pursuit, there's 19 risk factors that are covered in the policy that an officer is supposed to first do an analysis of and then continue to do analysis of throughout the duration of the pursuit.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So there will be the examples of the
More?
yes, sir.
Okay,
I don't know if it's not updated on the other.
there we go.
So I'll just go through the risk factors. So the first one is the volume of vehicular and pedestrian traffic. That's one of the main considerations for continuing a pursuit. When there's lighter traffic, obviously there's less of an opportunity for the vehicle to collide with another vehicle. And then also with pedestrians, if a car crashes another car, there's at least some safety to that vehicle. Obviously, when a car hits a pedestrian, the likelihood of a severe injury is significantly higher. Traffic conditions, location of the pursuit, The safety of the public in the area of pursuit. This is specifically in relation to if there's a school in the area or a hospital in the area or an elderly care center. Things like that are things that an officer is factoring in their mind before initiating or continuing the pursuit. Safety of the pursuing officers, that's if the driving is so reckless that it's putting the officer in danger. Speed of the officer and the suspect vehicle, which is one of the larger considerations and usually is the main factor of an officer disengaging from a pursuit. Familiarity of the officer and supervisor with the area of the pursuit. That's important. So if they know a vehicle is driving into a dead end, obviously an officer is not going to drive into a dead end going at a high rate of speed because it's likely to cause a collision. Road and weather conditions, obviously wet roads lead to higher collisions. And then there's other factors that can play into whether it rained earlier or stuff like that, or early in the morning where there might be condensation on the ground. Time of day, the quality of communications. Generally, if we lose contact with an officer, say a pursuit goes outside of the city and we start to lose communications, it's not the safest to continue that pursuit. So a lot of times they'll disengage from that pursuit or try to hand it off to someone like CHP or another city. And then the performance capabilities of the police vehicle, and then the operation of the lights and sirens. Generally, if the siren's not working or lights are not working, the officer would disengage. The 12th one is availability of air support or field support. Air support is probably the biggest mitigating tool that we have for either avoiding pursuits or ending a pursuit successfully. Whether the officer has a ride-along passenger with him or her, if there is a ride-along, the officer won't continue the pursuit. That's against the policy. Whether the suspect is known or can be apprehended at a later time, that may be if the subject is known and we do know a location that we could locate them. Likely the unit will disengage from the pursuit or a supervisor will direct them to disengage. Whether or not the subject is known to be a juvenile, this doesn't necessarily mean if it is a juvenile that we would disengage from the pursuit, but it is something that's factored in, especially if they're already driving in an extremely reckless manner. If a non-suspect vehicle or pedestrian accident has occurred during a pursuit, that depends on the severity of the collision. If it's a large collision, a lot of times the officers will disengage, but sometimes suspect vehicles will sideswipe cars or take off mirrors, which isn't going to necessarily injure somebody, so the pursuit will continue as long as it's safe. The safety of the occupants fleeing in the vehicle. Sometimes the vehicle is fleeing in such a reckless manner or driving the wrong way on the roads where we'll disengage because it's posing such a significant danger to them as well as everybody else. The distance between pursuing vehicle and fleeing vehicle, where the distance is so great that the pursuing is futile. And then where the vehicle's location is longer. So those are the 19 risk factors. I know it sounds a lot when I'm describing it, but that series of risk assessments should be being done continuously as they're doing a pursuit or before they initiate a pursuit. So all pursuits are required to be conducted with a red light and siren activated, which is required by California law, and with due regard and caution for the safety of all persons using a roadway, which is also required by the California Vehicle Code. Next one, please. So pursuit terminations. So the pursuit shall be terminated after evaluating the risk factors and the safety risks to officers and the public when the risks outweigh the benefits of immediately apprehending the fleeing suspects. Pursuits may be terminated by any involved officer, any supervisor or commander based on their own risk assessment, based on either what they're seeing physically or what they're hearing over the radio. Once the pursuit's been terminated by any of the involved members, units are to disengage with that vehicle that was pursued. So that's covering kind of the basics of Department General Order J4, which is a policy that covers pursuits. In 2021, the chief at the time enacted a special order 9212. A special order basically amends standing policy within the department. That policy had certain provisions that adjusted the policy. The main one was, or the main two were the review process that pursuits went through, So previous to this special order, pursuit occurred, a supervisor would copy the pursuit, approve the pursuit. That same supervisor would then investigate the pursuit, and that pursuit would then be reviewed by the lieutenant. What this special order then created was that supervisor would approve the pursuit. They then wouldn't be able to do their own investigation. Another supervisor did their investigation, and then for a vehicle or for the units to then go over 50 miles per hour, they need to get permission from a lieutenant. And then the sergeant and the lieutenant then had to do separate supplementals, basically covering all the same information that the officer did. So it created a lot more administrative work related to that pursuit. And the other main provision was the 50 mile per hour policy. So a unit could engage in a pursuit, they requested permission, they'll get permission, then they have to request permission to go over 50. Once they get that permission, they can then proceed over 50 miles per hour. And then once this special order was enacted, our pursuits dropped substantially, as well as the percentage of subjects that we were taking into custody related to the pursuits. So the resources to mitigate pursuit. So the overall goal of pursuit is to safely apprehend the subjects associated to a crime-related vehicle. So by pursuing a vehicle, our hope is that the subject being pursued realizes that further flight is futile and they'll actually give up and surrender safely. If the pursuit continues, the goal is to direct additional resources to the vehicle, which may be able to apprehend the subjects by alternative means, or to disable the vehicle in a manner that's safer than continuing. So some of the resources that we use to try to mitigate pursuits is our air unit, Argus. Our air unit is probably the most effective way of both mitigating pursuit, and once a pursuit starts, having ground units terminate and be able to successfully follow the subjects who are inside of the vehicle to a location where we can safely conduct a takedown. The other ways that we can try to avoid this is if we have eyes on a vehicle and it's in an area where it's advantageous to actually pin that vehicle where it's at, not allowing them to get out. That is something we do, but it can be potentially dangerous. And we've had multiple incidents where cars will start to basically ping pong off of our police cars and citizens' cars or jump on the sidewalk. Obviously, that poses a danger not just to the officers and the person they're engaging, but also the greater public. Another technique that is used is tire deflation devices. This is used best when a vehicle is still and then is attempting to flee, and we can deploy at a low rate of speed. What we would call spike strips, they don't necessarily immediately deflate the tires. It's sort of a slow process. So using that can be effective, but oftentimes subjects get away because the vehicle continues to flee and then units are not in the pursuit. Another technique is a pursuit intervention technique, commonly called a pit maneuver. And that's where a law enforcement vehicle engages and attempts to spin the vehicle around and disable the engine. We do not do pits over 35 miles per hour. So you kind of have to get them in a very particular spot in order to do it. And there's also substantial danger that could occur if that subject then engages the officers with gunfire or they spin into another vehicle, something like that. The other option that we try to use is plainclothes surveillance teams. That is to get eyes on a vehicle and then direct uniformed officers to that vehicle at a advantageous time. So just go over some of the statistics. This is going to be from 2022 to 2024 year to date. So in 2022, that was previous to the special order that I mentioned. We had 130 pursuits. We had 2 level 1 pursuits, which are pursuits that eventually resulted in a fatal collision. And then 26 level 2s, which is a pursuit that ended with a collision of a vehicle, either into an inanimate object or another vehicle. There was 2 injuries to third-party subjects, which were complaints of pain. That's a person that wasn't involved in the pursuit that was then hit by usually the suspect vehicle. And then as far as suspects, we had one severe injury, which is a pelvic fracture, which was actually after the officers lost view of the vehicle, one minor laceration and 2 points of pain. There's 34 in custody as a result of the pursuits, which was a 26% apprehension rate, with 15 firearms recovered. And the actual average speed on surface streets for those pursuits was 58 miles per hour. So you'll see in 2023, this is past or after the special order was put into place. Pursuits dropped down to 85. There was 0 level 1 or fatal collisions that resulted as a result of the pursuit. There was 11 level 2s, which is where the vehicle collided, which was 12% of the pursuits. 1 third-party injury, and then it looks like 4 injuries resulted to the subject that was fleeing. Then you'll see that our in custody rate dropped down to 14%, which is 12 of those 85. And then 5 firearms recovered, and the average speed actually went up to 60 miles per hour. And I will say, especially in 2023, the majority, actually all but one of the pursuits went over the speed of 50 miles per hour. The one that didn't was when they actually gave up during the pursuit. This is 2024 year date, so this is up until July 1st. There was 38 pursuits. There was no level 1s, so no fatalities during collisions. And there was 6 collisions that occurred during the pursuit. 2 injuries, third parties, and also 4 injuries to subjects involved in the pursuit. There's 9 in custody out of the 38, which is up to 24%. So we're kind of back to where we were with 3 firearms recovered, and the speed also went up to 65 miles per hour. And I would say, again, all of the in custodies were pursuits that went over 50 miles per hour. So historically, looking back, this is where fatality occurred as a result of a collision during the pursuit. So 2019, 2020, during the original policy, there was 0. 2021, there was 1, which was a subject that was attempting to flee, crashing into a truck. 2022, as I said, there was 2. 2023, there's been 0. 2024, there was 0. And just for reference, we average around 30 vehicular homicides a year, or fatal accidents a year on Oakland City streets. And we're at 17 this year. So unfortunately, we're on track for kind of the average that we have. Just comparable data. So this is from the sheriff's office in 2021. At the time, so 2021, I believe they still had their original chase policy, which is they would chase for any one, so traffic, misdemeanor, felony. They had a total of 160 pursuits. Of those, 101 felonies, 41 misdemeanors, and then 20 infractions. There was arrest in 20 of those instances, which is 12%, which is significantly higher than our arrest rate. 78 pursuits terminated by the deputy themselves, and then 51 were terminated by their supervisor. 14 of their pursuits resulted in collisions, which is about 8% of their pursuits. And 2 subjects from the vehicles were injured, and 4 uninvolved parties were actually injured. And they had no collisions that led to a fatality during their pursuits. So I'm sure this will come up in the ad hoc and then going forward. So there was a report that was generated by the Police Executive Review Forum. This is basically a collection of academics, highway safety officials, and current and former law enforcement members. And what is pretty clear when you read even the executive summary is that a lot of the things that they're discussing as steps that they wanted other departments to take were steps that we have already had in our previous policies since 2014. I don't think there was not really any significant differences as far as what they're recommending versus what we already were doing. And that's my presentation, and then obviously we can open the questions or if the captains want to add anything.
I'll touch up on a little bit when we're talking about mitigating factors. I would say I worked in East Oakland most of my career. We do see that most of the pursuits that we get involved happen in East Oakland. I think that we have evolved as an organization when it comes to pursuits. and adapting new tactics and new ways to mitigate that risk, because we know obviously when we're pursuing vehicles, that those vehicles are like 5,000 pounds and they're being driven most times by people that really don't have any regard for safety. So some of the ways that we mitigate those risks, Sergeant Ortiz already talked about it. It's our air support. That helicopter prevents so many pursuits every day. Also, what we do is using our plainclothes officers. So one example of that, if we spot a vehicle that it has a want, let's say a robbery want, or is a vehicle that was involved in the shooting, then what officers in the field are trained to do is call for assistance. That means we'll get the plainclothes officers to that location, and then we'll do what we call a surveillance and takedown. So pretty much what we're trying to do is separate the driver of that vehicle from his vehicle, and then wait for that opportunity and do a detention. And that's the best way we have found to prevent pursuits. Another thing or tool that we use is, Sergeant Giza talked about it, is the use of stop sticks. Again, a lot of coordination goes into it. It does take a lot of manpower, and obviously in addition to the helicopter, but thanks to that, I believe that that has dramatically reduced our vehicle pursuits. Back in 2023, I was part of a unit, it's called Bonnet County Operations Center. One of the most proactive units in the department. We were not involved in a single vehicle pursuit. However, our members from our unit, when they worked overtime and in certain areas of the city, without the resources, meaning helicopter air support or units in plainclothes that can do surveillance, they were involved. Their number of pursuits increased dramatically. So that's one of the things that we start noticing as a department. Yes, is there a duty or an obligation to engage in pursuits based on what the suspects are doing? Yes, but we notice and we learn that if we have the proper equipment and logistics, we can prevent a lot of these pursuits and still have a safe outcome, meaning taking the suspects into custody without jeopardizing the safety of the community, the suspects, and the officers.
Yeah, no, I guess one thing I would add is in patrol, a pursuit is basically the worst case scenario for the officer. Like, it's the last step that we take. And even once the pursuit's initiated, one of the first things that any supervisor, or a lot of times the officer engaged in the pursuit, their first question is there any outside air that we can reach? Is there our helicopters up? Is there anything else that we can do to try to have that unit take over the pursuit so that the ground units can disengage? Because I mean, the speeds that those pursuits get to can be very high, but a lot of our officers have been pretty good about, once they identify that the vehicle is going at a speed well beyond their control, they'll disengage from the pursuit as not to risk the community's safety.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Gabriel, and now Joseph from the Inspector General's office.
Hello. Hello, I'm Joseph Connor McCullough. I'm the policy analyst for the Office of the Inspector General. I want to start out by saying thank you to the department for giving a very good overview of the policy. We'll touch on a lot of things that I will discuss. So it's a great intro. So I looked at the pursuit policy. You can go on to the next slide. I looked at the pursuit policy in 8 different jurisdictions, as well as Oakland.
It takes a minute to
There
advance.
it goes.
There you go.
So for starters, I want to talk a little bit about kind of academic research into pursuits. The reality is there kind of just isn't any. There is very little actual research on pursuits. What little exists seems to imply that loosening pursuit policies doesn't really increase the percentage of pursuits that result in collisions, but does reduce officer force after pursuits, which is kind of a strange result in and of itself. This research is old, it's low quality, it's really poorly documented, and the figures on the end results of pursuits are kind of all over the place. So the California Highway Patrol collects pursuit data from every jurisdiction in California. They're all required to report every pursuit. And they claim that in 2022, 24 of the 34 pursuit fatalities in California were of the fleeing driver. However, this is pretty directly contradicted by San Francisco Chronicle reporting that estimates that the majority of pursuit deaths were not the fleeing driver. These are like very large discrepancies. Depending on how you look at data or where you look at data, the outcome of pursuits varies massively. And no research exists as to the benefits or costs of restricting pursuit policies. It's just not clear what changing these policies does in a lot of ways, because frankly, the question is hard to answer. It's a very difficult research topic and one that just hasn't been addressed at the municipal level yet. So in terms of California state law is, again, really limited. Penal Code section 13519.8 requires the Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training, also known as POST, to establish pursuit guidelines. And then assuming the department meets the training and policy standards as required by POST, they are protected from civil liability for pursuits. And that's really all that exists in state law. So POST standards, again, are limited and vague. So POST requires annual pursuit training, regular assessments, and that all peace officers sign an attestation stating they both read and understand the department's policy. And then the department policies must provide guidelines on 15 topics. So these topics are when to initiate a pursuit, the number of involved, law enforcement units permitted, responsibilities of primary and secondary law enforcement units, driving tactics, helicopter assistance, communications, capture of suspects, termination of a pursuit, supervisory responsibilities, blocking, ramming, boxing, and roadblock procedures, speed limits, interjurisdictional considerations, conditions of the vehicle, driver, roadway, weather, and traffic, hazards to uninvolved bystanders or motorists, and then reporting and post-pursuit analysis. However, all of these guidelines follow the same basic form, where POST gives a list of risk factors and says that in the creation of the policy, the department needs to consider all of these risk factors. And each of these different guidelines has different risk factors. And then from there, the department simply has to have a policy. So it does not tell the department how to weigh these risk factors, which factors are more important, which factors are less important, or which direction the policy should go. So for example, point 11 is speed limits. So departments have to address speed limits of pursuits in their policy, but departments don't have to have a speed limit. They just need to address the existence of speed limits in their policy. For this comparison, we focus on the following. So the type of crimes in which pursuit is allowed, the need for supervisory approval to begin a pursuit, the maximum number of pursuers allowed without supervisory override, maximum speed without supervisory override, required pursuer response to helicopter units, acquiring a visual on the target, accountability language indicating who may bear the highest burden should policy ultimately not be followed, and then the pursuit intervention maneuvers, or PIM, that are authorized. So we looked at 8 cities within California: San Jose, which is the largest city in the South Bay; San Francisco, the largest city in the West Bay; Fremont, which is the second largest city in Alameda County; and then LA County, which is the largest local police force in California. And then outside of California, we looked at Detroit, Washington, Rochester, New York, and Atlanta. This is selected based on a sample provided by a Rochester Institute of Technology working paper on 2023 homicide statistics. So the thing with homicide statistics is there isn't like a central location where you can just find every city's homicide rate. This is a thing you generally have to calculate kind of manually. So this paper provided a set of cities that could serve as a comparison, and when ordered by the 2023 homicide rate, Detroit and DC are the third and fourth highest in that 24 city sample. Oakland is fifth, and Rochester and Atlanta were sixth and seventh. So it's the 2 cities immediately ahead of Oakland and the 2 cities immediately behind it. So policy in Oakland, it allows pursuits for violent, forcible crimes and or crimes involving the use of firearms. So important to emphasize, violent, forcible is not violence. Those are different categories, which we will discuss a little bit later. Upon the start of a pursuit, the pursuer must seek verbal approval from a supervisor. If verbal approval is not granted immediately, the pursuer is to disengage. No more than 2 units are to participate in a pursuit. 50 miles per hour is the maximum pursuit speed. When a helicopter unit obtains visual on a fleeing suspect, all units must disengage and begin trailing. Supervisor has primary responsibility for terminating a pursuit and is held equally responsible for pursuit continuation. And then the training bulletin, TB3B9, allows for channeling, boxing in, the pit maneuver, and spike strips stop stick with supervisory approval and appropriate training. One more thing I kind of want to emphasize there is that with basically every aspect of Oakland's policy and every jurisdiction's policy, all of these restrictions come with the caveat that under specific circumstances as dictated by a commander, so a lieutenant or a captain, they can kind of get around the rules, so to speak. They can authorize more units in pursuit if a situation is particularly dangerous and they need, a secondary pursuer. They can authorize speeds above 50 miles per hour, but these all require not just supervisory approval, but commander approval, which is a higher, but even higher level, and are things that are not, it's not common practice by any means, but there's always situations where, if you have an active shooter situation, you don't want to be bound by a 50 mile per hour speed limit. That is somebody that needs to be addressed. So you need a way to address situations that are of extreme public danger while still having the policy limit situations in which pursuit can be used. So the policy in San Jose, high-speed pursuit is authorized when the violator is believed to be a violent felon, possesses a significant ongoing threat to public safety. This is a unique way of dealing with a pursuit policy where it doesn't actually specify a specific crime or type of crime. I believe it's the only jurisdiction I looked at that didn't specifically specify crimes or categories of crime. Pursuit does not require verbal approval from a supervisor. So in all the jurisdictions where the pursuit does not require verbal approval, how the process works is the pursuit begins, the officer initiates the pursuit, calls in to dispatch, and is given a pursuit supervisor. So they have somebody watching over the pursuit, and that pursuit supervisor has the authority to terminate the pursuit, but unlike Oakland, it is assumed that the officer who begins the pursuit may at least initiate the pursuit. In Oakland, the officer needs to call in, speak to a pursuit supervisor, and then have that supervisor okay the pursuit. So the beginning of the pursuit is a shared process between the pursuit supervisor and the pursuer, whereas in San Jose, the beginning of the pursuit is entirely on the pursuing officer, though termination of the pursuit later on can be done by that pursuit supervisor. 2 cars are allowed in pursuit, just as in Oakland. There is no set maximum speed that requires commander override. The pursuit is terminated upon helicopter visual. It states that the primary pursuing unit is responsible for pursuit conduct. So when it comes to following pursuit policy, a larger percentage of burden falls on the pursuer as opposed to pursuit supervisors. Allows for the following: patrol intervention maneuvers, blocking freeways, exits or access ramps, pit maneuver, boxing in, and tire deflation tactics. And it discourages but allows for roadblocks in certain situations. San Francisco recently changed their pursuit policy, like very recently. So as of, I believe, as of November, I don't know if it has fully gone into effect yet. Measure E authorized pursuits for all felonies and violent misdemeanors. This is the only policy I looked at that allowed pursuits for misdemeanors at all, and all felonies is significantly broader than any other jurisdiction that I've looked at. No verbal approval needed to begin the pursuit. 2 cars allowed in pursuit. No maximum speed. Pursuits do not need to be terminated on a helicopter visual. So the helicopter can find the suspect, be tracking the suspect, but officers can remain in pursuit. There's no supervisory accountability language. Drones may be used for vehicle pursuits and have facial recognition software. This is another aspect of the recently passed Measure E. And boxing in and channeling are both outlawed, whereas they're allowed in Oakland. And then in Fremont, the pursuit is authorized when the reasonable suspicion of a violent or serious felony or residential burglary, brandishing a firearm, or carrying a concealed firearm. So it is essentially, the policy is a violent felony or all residential burglaries. Pursuit does not require approval of a supervisor. 3 cars are allowed in pursuits. No speed limit. Air unit assumes control upon visual contact, but ground units may continue their support. Their pursuits states that the primary pursuing unit is responsible for pursuit conduct, much like San Jose. It allows for blocking, star chase, pit maneuver, tire deflation, with ramming and roadblocks explicitly not authorized. Ramming is an interesting one to include on that list because no department authorizes ramming at this point in time. That it's like such a 1990s, 1980s policing maneuver. It is very much a relic of a different era to even include that in the policy.
Joseph, what is Star Chase?
Star Chase is a system that OPD actually just discontinued its not use of, really. It is essentially a GPS tracking system where it is supposed to work via firing a GPS tracker at a fleeing vehicle so that you can track it later on. I know OPD had less than stellar experience with using Star Chase. I believe it attempted to use it 3 times and had it successfully work 0 times and then ended their contract. So Star Chase is very recently no longer a thing OPD has access to.
Thank you.
So in LA County, pursuit is authorized for serious felonies and misdemeanors involving a gun, or when a driver may be impaired, driving recklessly, and failure to stop them would imperil the public. There's no supervisory approval needed to begin a pursuit. 4 cars are allowed in pursuits. And it is assumed that 20 miles per hour over the speed limit is grounds for pursuit termination. However, this does not apply to any violent felonies. So an LA County Sheriff would terminate a pursuit at 20 miles per hour over unless it is a violent felony, and then they would go back to the standard of evaluating the risk factors and determining from their evaluation whether the pursuit should continue. Pursuit is terminated upon helicopter visual. All involved personnel are held equally accountable for failure to terminate, and the policy is explicit about that, unlike San Jose or Fremont. And it allows for pit maneuver, tire deflation, and boxing in. Atlanta, Georgia has the most restrictive of the pursuit origination, pursuit authorization policies. So pursuit is authorized when the officer has direct knowledge of a suspect committing a forcible felony where the escape poses an imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury. And its definition of forcible felony is very strict. It's only authorized for murder, manslaughter, vehicular homicide, armed robbery, hijacking a motor vehicle, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and escape. So that would be prison escape, essentially. The supervisory approval is required to begin pursuit, much like in Oakland. 2 vehicles in pursuit with a 3rd allowed in specific circumstances. So Atlanta has a strange pursuit policy where 2 vehicles are allowed to pursue through the entire city. However, each time a pursuit crosses into a different police beat, a 3rd officer from that specific beat is allowed to join the pursuit, but only up until the limits of their beat. And then they essentially pass off that 3rd pursuer role to a different beat. There is no stated maximum speed, and the pursuit slows down upon helicopter visual, but lights stay on. So in Oakland and in most jurisdictions that require the pursuit to be terminated, officers will enter what is referred to as trailing. So that is lights off, driving normally, trying to stay out of sight of the fleeing suspect. Whereas in Atlanta, the lights stay on. The officers are supposed to drive according to traffic laws, but the lights stay on for the duration of the helicopter visual. There's no additional accountability language and allows for the pit maneuver for trained and specially equipped officers. So in Detroit, pursuits are authorized when probable cause of a violent felony. Supervisory approval is not required. 2-car limit with no max speed. Upon a helicopter visual, the pursuit continues, but speeds are reduced. So essentially, upon helicopter visual, the policy resorts to a form of Oakland's policy, where there is a soft speed limit without additional commander override. The policy states the primary officer is in charge of determining if a pursuit should continue, and it does not allow for rolling or stationary roadblocks. In Rochester, pursuits are allowed for a series of offenses. Kind of most notably, as compared to Oakland, it's all arsons, all burglaries, Class A drug offenses, and then a series of violent crimes, felony assault, forcible rape, kidnapping. There's no supervisory approval needed. 2 cars max in pursuit with no maximum speed. There's no information on helicopter units or any additional accountability language within the policy. Roadblocks, ramming, and boxing in are all prohibited. So boxing in is what was discussed by the department earlier, where they will surround a stationary vehicle with police vehicles to prevent them from fleeing in that way. And tire deflation devices are allowed at the discretion of the supervisor. And then in Washington, D.C., the pursuit is authorized when the fleeing suspect committed a crime of violence or is an imminent threat to others. It requires supervisory approval. There's a 3-vehicle max, including a supervisor. This is the only policy that explicitly includes a supervisor in a vehicle as part of a pursuit. It has no maximum speed with the pursuit continuing upon helicopter visual, no additional accountability language, and then most pursuit intervention maneuvers are outlawed in Washington, D.C. So boxing, ramming, roadblocks, tire laws. So to kind of broadly compare these policies, Oakland has amongst the most restrictive in terms of crimes. Fremont allows for burglary pursuits, Rochester for drug-related pursuits, San Jose, Detroit, and DC allow for all violent felonies to be pursued. However, Oakland is more permissive than Atlanta. So this is where I think it's important to acknowledge that the difference between violent forcible and purely violent, which is the standard in San Jose, Detroit, Washington, DC, is actually really small. So the OPD's policy defines its own set of policies and refers to them as violent forcible, whereas violent is a crime designation in the penal code. The only difference between the two there's 3 main differences between the two, which is that violent contains gang-related extortion, gang-related intimidation of witnesses or jurors, and residential burglary where an individual other than the burglar is on the premises. So if somebody breaks into your house while you're sleeping, and attempts to steal your possessions, that is considered a violent crime, but is not a violent forcible crime as per Oakland's pursuit guidelines. So those are the only 3 differences, and those OPD would be able to comment on this better than I can, but those don't strike me as terribly common crimes. Particularly the first 2, residential burglary with an individual on the premises might be a little more common, but I imagine those are not, that particular rule, that particular policy difference is not exactly stopping a huge number of pursuits. 3 of the 9 require supervisory approval to begin pursuit. So that's a bit of an oddity, but not totally out of the blue. 5 of the 9 limit pursuit to 2 vehicles, so that's fairly standard. And Oakland is actually pretty permissive in terms of pursuit intervention maneuvers, with 3 of the 9 explicitly prohibiting pursuit intervention maneuvers that are used in Oakland. And this goes up to 5 of 9 if you assume that a prohibition on roadblocks would also prohibit channeling. So channeling is essentially the idea of setting up police vehicles to encourage a suspect to go a specific direction. In a few departments, that is rarely addressed in these policies, but my assumption is that a prohibition on roadblocks would include that. So Oakland is the only department reviewed with a set speed limit. That is, I think, the biggest difference between Oakland and other jurisdictions. None that I looked at mentioned speed in that explicit of a way. The closest is LA Sheriff's, but LA Sheriff's only applies to crimes that are not violent felonies, and Oakland only engages in pursuit for things that would be considered violent felonies. So that speed limit doesn't cover any of the pursuits OPD would feasibly engage in. And then there's no consensus on a response to helicopter visuals. 3 departments terminate, 3 departments allow pursuit to continue as normal, and 2 allow specific actions without fully terminating a pursuit. So that's an area where there is not any agreement between departments as to the correct, quote unquote, correct response. And then policies often do not explicitly state supervisory accountability. Only 2 departments explicitly state that the supervisor is held equally accountable, with 3 departments seeming to place a majority of the burden on the pursuing officer as opposed to the supervisor. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. So, yeah, so what I want to do is to have some of the members of the ad hoc who are online ask some questions, and then I will ask the questions. They're still, you can write a question out from the audience and we'll ask those, but I want to start with a couple of questions that I think would then give the folks from the department, Sergeant Gabriel, a chance to respond both to the question and to what Joseph had to say. So two questions I wanted to ask, if you might respond to. One is, when the more restricted policy was put in place, was there any evidence of ghost pursuits? Ghost pursuits being those that were done by officers, but that weren't recorded.
Are we out of questions?
And then the other one was had to do with the star chase. What happened with star chase? You know,
So I'll start with the intro. I know that the chase that's been in the news, or the alleged chase that's been that occurred previous to the adjustments of the policy. And so far as we know, there hasn't been another incident such as that. But that section, the 50-mile-per-hour speed thing and the additional review wouldn't have prevented that incident, and does not really address what that issue was. And kind of, I think we didn't really speak to it because it's not really in the policy, it's covered in a different policy, but the biggest accountability tool that we have as part of pursuits is the body worn camera. So in relation to body worn camera policy, the body worn camera is to be activated prior to initiating the pursuit and then throughout the duration of the pursuit. And there's a very set standard, and some people have even gone further. Once you disengage from a pursuit, you're turning off your lights, turn off your siren, you're either pulling to the side of the road if possible, or pulling off the direction of travel. There's certain roads, freeways, things like that, that's not possible. But it's trying to make it clear to the person that's being pursued that we are disengaging, and hopefully that they'll start to drive in a more responsible manner. But the officer continues to have the body worn camera, and often they'll actually get out of the car, show the state of their vehicle and stuff like that. So in that particular incident, I can't speak to the details, because I think it's still open investigation, but that was part of one of the issues was the cameras. So the policy itself isn't going to prevent somebody making a decision like that. As far as star chase works really well for certain agencies. It didn't work well for us specifically because of what we chased. I was there for the first, I guess you could say, partially successful deployment where we're pulling, the unit was pulling behind the vehicle. It wasn't a vehicle that we could particularly chase. I believe it was an auto burglary vehicle. The vehicle started to flee. They deployed the star chase, which is deployed kind of like an air round. It goes in the air and it slowly lobs onto the vehicle and sticks to it. It's very loud. You can hear when it sticks. And then they proceeded to flee. And at that point, we actually tried to get the helicopter over it. They drove under a freeway overpass, but because the units couldn't actually stay with the car, because they couldn't chase the car, they couldn't stay close enough to prevent the people from getting out of the car, seeing the sticky thing, grabbing it and throwing it, and then driving away. So in other agencies, they've had a lot of success because they hit it with the star chase, and it's really just a system. If the vehicle gets out of their side on the freeway exits, they can see that it exits, they get back and re-engage. So the technology just wasn't built for our needs. And once we conducted that assessment and we saw that it wasn't going to work, I think Sartes actually gave us another year, basically free of charge, to see if we could figure out a way to make it work. And it wasn't. So we made the decision to move away from that. And then if I could, there was a couple of the differences from the presentation to what the policy says, and I know it can be confusing. Could we go, is it possible to open it up and go back to the slides?
To Joseph's or yours?
Joseph. I'll just start going over it while we pull it up, but one of the biggest things is the standard is that when a pursuit is initiated, there's 2 units that are allowed to be in the pursuit. That's what the policy authorizes immediately. A supervisor or a commander can then authorize more units to be involved in pursuit based on the details. So I think I've seen up to 5 for a case where it was a homicide suspect or it turned into a homicide suspect, but fleeing outside of the city. So they just needed enough units to actually address that vehicle. And then if that person foot bailed from the vehicle, they could set up a perimeter with Oakland before we got outside agencies. So it's anywhere between 2 to usually 5. There's other circumstances. Somebody sold a bus full of people, we probably put 10 or 11 units involved in pursuit. So that is supposed to be based on how many occupants we kind of interpret are in the vehicle. If there's 1 person in the vehicle, we probably don't need more than 3 units. 3 is kind of the standard.
To be clear, all of these were based on the policy prior to commander approval or override. So with the pursuits, the policy states 2 units without any commander input. And in general, it's the same with the speed limit, right? Like the average speed of a pursuit in Oakland is above the 50-mile-per-hour speed limit set, but that is the speed limit prior to involving a commander, which, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is lieutenant or higher in the command structure.
And so I just wanted to clear that up quickly, because I know it can be confusing because you're looking at things and that's correct. So I just want to make sure we're covering that. As far as so requesting permission, usually what will occur is an officer will say that they're behind a vehicle and the vehicle's already fleeing. So the officer's actually engaging in a pursuit prior to asking for permission. What they're doing is stating essentially, I'm involved in a pursuit with the vehicle that matches or at least qualifies under our policy. They'll request permission, essentially continue the pursuit. And there's supposed to be a reasonable period of time that they're allotted if there's no response. Now, if they don't get a response within that period, then they have to disengage. So sometimes that's something that will happen. We've had that a lot with the 50-mile-per-hour edition. And as far as boxing in and channeling, we do have it in our policy. I know that like when I first started, we trained on it. I've never seen it done. I don't think we've ever authorized it. It's not something that's done. And when we talk about boxing in as far as what the policy is talking about, that is basically boxing in a vehicle as it's in motion. So taking 4 patrol vehicles on a freeway, 1 goes ahead, 2 on the side, and 1 in the back, and then they basically slow the vehicle down and then pin it between the cars. That's what boxing in is as far as our policy. Pinning or positive contact with a vehicle and pushing it into an inanimate object, that's a different concept. But it's very easy to confuse the 2. But when we're talking about boxing in the policy, that's the four vehicles in motion. For our helicopter, and this is similar to a lot of agencies, but once our helicopter's overhead, in the majority of cases, yes, the units are going to disengage because the helicopter is trying to take us to a location that's more advantageous for us to take that person into custody, or they realize they're not going to get away. And oftentimes they'll either stop and give up, or they'll try to go inside and take a house or residence or a yard, and then we can set a perimeter, slow everything down. And obviously that's a lot safer for everybody involved. There are circumstances, and this happened. Richmond had a chase with a homicide suspect from their city. They arrived in our city. It was a single Richmond unit was chasing this car. Our OP units got involved. Our helicopter got overhead. I think another helicopter got overhead, but Richmond continued to chase the car. And then we couldn't really pull off because we didn't want that officer to be by himself if they ended up, the suspect vehicle collided with something and they ended up by themselves. So in that case, a lieutenant can override it and say, yes, I understand the helicopter's there. These are the reasons that we're going to continue to pursue. Units can stay in that pursuit. But like I said, very, very narrow. It rarely happens. That's for situations where we've had where people are driving around pointing guns at people or intentionally colliding with police cars, stuff like that. And then one thing I didn't really go over, we have, and it's a separate policy, but we do have a pursuit board that then reviews the pursuits after they occur. So pursuit will occur, the supervisor that approved it does their report. Another supervisor then reviews that, sends all that information up to the board, and then the board will review each and every pursuit that comes through to make sure that that pursuit is in compliance or if there's any training that's actually needed for it. And that board currently consists of kind of a rotating board. Captain Auspice is there often. I've been part of the board. So that's like an added level of review. Also, we have a representative from the city attorney's office in there that will also point out anything that they see or any concerns that they have. And then we usually discuss what we can do better, what training points there are, and then there's quarterly goals, and that's supposed to be set out that will cover what those topics are, whether it's remembering to turn your siren on immediately after you turn your lights on, or it's making sure that your camera's not on standby mode, or stuff like that. So there are numerous levels of review, which I haven't necessarily seen in other departments, but that is something that we have and that we spend a lot of time on. And those pursuit board members will go through all the video, all the reports, and all the investigations. So there's a lot of things to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks on stuff like that. And then I just wanted to speak briefly to kind of what our challenge is, because we were talking about what other agencies chase for, which we don't, and then how that might affect it. So obviously the biggest thing that we're dealing with recently is commercial burglaries. These are sometimes, entire caravans of vehicles. It could be one vehicle, it could be two vehicles. Sometimes we've seen 20, 30 vehicles. During certain times I've seen up to 100 plus. Recently, we'll see that every day of the week, there will be caravans of vehicles that are going to different locations and attempting to break into the property and either get to the safe or get to whatever goods are inside and steal those goods. What we've noticed is that they've gotten more and more brazen because they know that they know what our response is. So they'll stay on scene until a unit actually pulls up and they'll run out and jump in the car and just take off. And they know that we can't chase them, and it causes a lot of frustration to the community, and it causes a lot of frustration to us because it feels like while this isn't somebody's public, like it's not their safety right then, it's their livelihood, it's how they make a living, it's how they can even continue their businesses. So it's a huge point of frustration for the department. I know it's a huge frustration of most of the community members I talk to. And in other departments, they chase for that, and it's not always going to mean that the person is going to be held accountable for the crime. Because, you've seen overwhelming amount of time they get off. 75% of the time they get away. But it's that fear of accountability, and then dissuading people from even coming to this city and getting engaged in it that we're really working towards. And the other issue that we have a lot of is sideshows. So we have a lot of vehicles driving recklessly, driving head on with officers, doing all kinds of stuff. And then when officers can't do anything, it emboldens them. And we've seen more of officers having people drive, like basically playing chicken with them in traffic, driving at officers that are out of their vehicles, stuff like that. So those are kind of the biggest challenges we've had. And then one of the biggest issues we've had with the new special order is because there's so many different people who have their hands in it. There's way more radio traffic than we've ever seen. So information that should be getting broadcast for the safety of the officers is not getting out because there's so many different approval people and other people trying to get what they're required to do by policy into the radio traffic, that it then basically clogs up the air, and that's caused some safety issues with officers. So I just wanted to make sure that I went over that before the questions. Maybe that will answer some of the questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let me see if the other ad hoc members, I know Commissioner Ricardo Garcia Acosta is online, and Jose Dorado and Reggie Lyles. I don't know if any of them have a question.
Vice Chair Ricardo Garcia Acosta is the only one that's on at this time. I don't know, Vice Chair, do you have any comments or anything that you'd like to share at this time? If so, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you both for such a informative conversation. Excuse me for having my camera off and not being in person. Just had some emergency medical procedures earlier today, so I really regret not being able to be there in person. But this is very informative, and I'm looking forward to the discussion, hearing from the public. I do have a couple questions, but definitely want to hear from the public first, and then maybe we could see where we go from there.
Question first, if that's possible. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so it's clear, it's clear that in regards to special orders 9212, that there was a drop off. It looks like about 35% decrease in the number of pursuits, and I'm wondering, in towards the end of this presentation, just right now, we mentioned the sideshows, and we've all seen things in public where folks aren't pursuing folks, and I'm wondering if the additional administrative tasks or the in-moment pursuit protocols are having more of an impact in that decision to not pursue in those 45 cases that were decreased from year to year that you all shared. And so I'm just wondering more so, like, really in the mind of a cop in that moment, what tangibly is it the additional administrative tasks and the approvals that are happening in that moment that are restricting anything from happening in that moment, or is it the subsequent pursuit protocols that end up happening? So I'm kind of curious around that, just in terms of like, what's leading to the behavior that we're seeing and the response that we're seeing from the general public. So that was one of the inquiries I had, and the other one was just around data around just public safety and comparing both. Comparing both some of the more relaxed policies versus the more restrictive policies, and being able to just look at just injuries and accidents impacting the general public, and any comparable data in that regard. So just those were my first couple initial thoughts, and definitely if we could see copies of these slides and dig a little bit deeper into some of these data points would also be very helpful. So thank you, Commissioner Ross.
So unconventionally, I'll start with the second question first. So it's very hard to get pursuit data from other agencies. Specifically, we've reached out to CHPs. They have their own review processes. It's been difficult to get exactly what their information is, specifically in regards to like collisions and then injuries, stuff like that. That's why ACSO, or Alameda County Sheriff's, was the one that I was able to get a hold of and speak with. The pursuit data they gave us was from 2021. It's comparable because they're an agency that also operates in Oakland. They operate in San Leandro, and they're dealing with a lot of the same challenges and issues that we are. They had a very unrestricted policy until recently. They have then basically pared it down, and they chase for residential burglaries, and then basically the same standards that we chase for. I haven't been able to see what their data is since then, but their chase numbers inside of their department is comparable. And you've seen, I don't know if we have the slide up, but there is a slide that covers how many injuries they had. I think it was an 8% or 8% of their incidents, or at 8% of their collisions. Right. But we don't see a lot of substantial injuries due to pursuits. And considering the amount of injuries and deaths that we have from vehicles in general in the city, we actually would expect there to be more collisions, but usually when vehicles collide with something, it's like a parked vehicle, or a lot of times it's a curb or stuff like that. But so that kind of covers that. So what I would say that there is kind of a lack of overall data that we can look at.
I can speak a little more on that. So even when talking about those pursuit-related collisions, this gets a little complicated because it's not clear even the degree to which the pursuit causes the pursuit collision. An individual if you look at the data from California Highway Patrol, only there were no law enforcement fatalities, and only 5% of injuries were to law enforcement officers. This seems to suggest that when these collisions happen, and Oakley would have this information better than I would, when these collisions happen, they tend to be the individual fleeing, colliding with something. And there's no reason that an individual fleeing has to have somebody actively in pursuit to collide with something. The thing that may be causing these collisions is the fleeing, and the fleeing may happen regardless of the pursuit policy. So you need information that looks at, in order to really determine the degree to which the pursuit policy itself and the pursuit itself impacts injuries and fatalities, you would need to look at how the change in the strictness of the pursuit policy impacts overall road fatalities, road injuries, involving individuals who had contact with police. It gets very complicated, and that's why this data doesn't really exist, because you would need to do, like, frankly, fairly extensive experimentation with pursuit policies within a city in order to really answer that question. Because, like I said, there's no, I mean, the officer Akiza talked about this with the commercial burglaries. When the officers show up, those individuals flee, and they're not fleeing like at the speed of traffic. They're fleeing at speed. So if the issue may well be that it is individuals fleeing as opposed to pursuits causing these incidents, it's all super unclear. And so even just looking at the number of injuries and even fatalities from pursuits doesn't necessarily tell you the degree to which the pursuit caused it, and the degree to which, like, if you eliminated pursuits in Oakland, those entirely, the injuries and fatalities that happened in pursuit may well happen anyway, just with an individual fleeing and there no officer in pursuit. We just don't know.
And I guess one thing I would add, and one thing I try to think about, is that it's very easy to calculate, obviously, how many fatalities we've had during a pursuit. But it's much harder to know how many homicides or other fatalities occurred due to not apprehending somebody who then would be, potentially behind bars or some other, or wouldn't be in the position to then, hurt or kill somebody. And the numbers of people who have just been shot are significantly higher than that. So it's a lot easier to compute, oh, well, there was, in 2021, we had one fatal pursuit out of, the 100+ pursuits that we have. But I try to focus also on what we're trying to achieve, which is getting people who are committing violent acts in our community, hurting people, legitimately hurting people and taking people from their family, getting those people in custody. And what's the best way to do that? And this is basically, pursuits are our last resort, but at times it's the only option that we have. So, and then just go back kind of to the numbers, because I can really only speak to what we have. And since 2019, there was 2 years where we didn't have any, 2021 and 2022, where we had 3 for both years. All 3 of those collisions that led to somebody being killed was the suspect vehicle crashing into another vehicle. We've had close calls where officers have hit each other over the years, but we've been very fortunate, and I think overall we've been fortunate there hasn't been more of these based on some of the driving that's been exhibited. And then I think if we wanted to circle back to the 9212 question, that's, I guess, more of a complicated question. What I will say is we had a pursuit board last week. There was a pursuit that I believe lasted 47 seconds. It went, I don't know, maybe less than a mile. So 47 seconds of pursuit. The amount of work that then generated was substantial. We're talking hours of work from the supervisor that originally approved it, the lieutenant that approved over the 50, because he has to then write a report and cover everything that he was thinking about. And then the other supervisor that's then doing an analysis of the original report, all the body worn camera video, the original supervisor, the lieutenant, and then it's coming to a board where we then had a conversation that was probably 20 times longer than the pursuit itself. So it does generate a pretty large administrative file. The thing I would say is that during the previous policy, there was still a lot of administrative work, but we understood what was going into that, why we were doing that, and there was we were looking to make sure there was accountability. We were making sure that people were following the rules, using the risk factors, all those things. But what that special order kind of did was just expand how much work was put into it, and then it spread this administrative workload across a lot of different people. And it's natural in any environment for before somebody does something, they're like, hey, am I just creating a bunch of work for somebody else? And I hope, and I think this year we've seen more people are willing to engage in it because people are willing to go, or lieutenants are willing to go over that 50 miles per hour, and we've seen that arrest rate go up. But that administrative burden it should be quantitated, it should be looked at, because it is important, because that's time that the lieutenant's not supervising, that's time that the sergeant's not supervising. So hopefully that answers that.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to encourage folks who are online in Zoom and folks that are here to go to the commission's website and join the ad hocs from the commission and to get emails from the commission, because
Take
it's
a picture of this email
it's very important work that's being done. Sean Everhart, do you want to?
Sure.
Okay. And then if Amara Bodo, can follow Sean?
Yeah. So, hi, Sean Everhart. I'm on the Privacy Advisory Commission, and I've got two questions that kind of fall into each other. So how many times, so let's say you say we're gonna have a pursuit. How many times is it the superior officer says, no, don't have that pursuit? Any idea on that one?
I don't know. I didn't necessarily do that for that. I know if a supervisor declines it and it's not a pursuit, it would usually be considered a non-responsive.
And that's not tracked or anything like that?
The number of them are,
Okay.
yeah. But if a vehicle say flees and the unit never lit the vehicle up, that information would, so that wasn't a stop.
Okay.
So if they committed a violation, so the 2000.1, which is evading of all law enforcement officer, that would be for a case where the unit's behind it, they light it up, hit the siren, request permission, and the vehicle flees, and then they got declined.
Does that tie into any of the police reporting crime data that's released, or is that just kind of a field that doesn't go into that?
I'm not sure how we do track it,
But it doesn't go into that report that's put out. The crime data release report.
No.
No.
But we do have a significant amount of failure.
No problem. I get it. The other question I have is obviously with Flock, all that coming out. How do you see that integrating into this pursuit policy discussion? I know that you're not there yet, but I'm obviously, that's been a big push for the community. So I'm just curious.
So what I can speak, because I'm doing the integration for Flock. So operationally, it's probably going to benefit us as far as using our other resources to proactively locate those vehicles. It's not going to eliminate the need for pursuits, because certain times those vehicles are just going to appear in front of the vehicle and the officer has to do something. What we saw in other cities when we were doing our analysis of how we could integrate Flock, their pursuit numbers would shoot up, because those units would be constantly getting alerts for stolen vehicles or carjacking vehicles, robbery vehicles. So their pursuits went way up. They actually had to shut the system down, restart how they were doing things, and then they put individual units that were only responsible for responding to Flock. So we're going to have to see, because we've seen that, we're not going to make the same mistake. So we're going to have different severity crime thresholds for patrol, and we're working through that. But we're anticipating that we'll actually probably drop our number of pursuits that we have.
Cool. Thank you.
And then followed by one. Go ahead.
Hi, About how long does it take to request permission, for to pursue?
Seconds.
Seconds.
Well, let's see, can you repeat the question because the people on
So the
Zoom.
question was, how long does it take to request pursuit from a supervisor?
So generally, the officer will put out, it depends also on what the suspect vehicle is doing. So if an officer is just behind the vehicle, it's not fleeing yet, they'll usually say, hey, I'm behind a robbery vehicle. This is where I am, this is where I'm located, and they'll wait for additional units to get with them to try to do a felony stop. At which point, they'll usually say, if the vehicle flees, is there permission to pursue? And that usually gives them a little extra time. The supervisor can maybe do some follow-up and try to figure out what exactly the thing tied to. That's one version of it. A lot of times it's the unit gets behind it, the vehicle immediately flees, they start pursuit, they'll put out the critical information, basically what the want for the vehicle is, where they're at, the location and the direction of travel of the vehicle. And then they'll ask for permission to pursue. A lot of times they're asking three things all at once: permission to pursue, 3 vehicles, and then authorization for a pit. Supervisor will assess whatever the information is. If it's a carjacking vehicle, usually a pit will be authorized, but we cannot do a pit until there's 3 cars involved. So they're basically just trying to get all that out of the way so that we're in the middle of the pursuit, they can concentrate on driving. And then, so it's usually seconds. It just depends. Sometimes there's a lot of radio traffic, so it'll take a little bit longer time, but usually it's within a second. And then what I guess I didn't really cover in the presentation. So while the unit is actually in pursuit, they're putting out other information. So they're still putting out the speed conditions of the vehicle or for the location. So if you're driving northbound on 81st, driving northbound on 81st Avenue, speeds are about 50. There's light vehicle, no pedestrians.
Constant.
Yeah, so it's constant, and that's constant. You're basically painting the picture for the supervisor that's then authorizing that. So like at night, pursuit speeds can usually go a little bit higher because there's a lot less vehicle traffic, and usually there's generally no pedestrians on. So that's one of the things that you're constantly reassessing and assessing.
Thank you. And to add to that, the supervisors then who are monitoring the pursuit are also monitoring what traffic is being put out. Is it the correct traffic? How does that officer sound on the radio? Are they calm? Are they way up here, super high pitched? At which point the supervisor then needs to analyze and assess, whether let this officer continue to pursue, or is their adrenaline so high that maybe it's safer, let's set this down and decline pursuit. Or what we say is night rate cancel, right? So there's a lot of risk factors a lot of assessment that goes back and forth between, right? So if my officer can't answer my questions while they're pursuing, then they're kind of tunneled in and have that adrenaline. And that's telling me that I need to bring them back a little bit. If they can't do that, then we cancel the pursuit because then they're not able to process it. So there's a lot of things that go back and forth.
Edward Escobar.
With the new age of AI, what are we doing to stay up with the latest high tech to be used for more efficient and effective law enforcement? Since you mentioned about Star Chaser, it's the concept is still good. So because Star Chaser doesn't work, doesn't mean, okay, let's scrap that. You know, there's other things that other departments are doing, even internationally, that, you know, as far as using technology. Where's the drones? You know, where you spot something and send the drone up to track it. I mean, the military is using all kinds of stuff. I mean, where's the lack of communication between, you know, different elements? It's just thinking outside the box. I mean, even the movies, people like talking, hey, you know, it's like you can do it. It's there.
Right, but in the movies, I could also solve a murder in 35 minutes and have all my neighbors, right? So, but the drone is a great idea, and we are looking into that. He has the drones, or part of the drones, but you have to stop the vehicle, bring the drones out, you have to fly the drones. You also have to get permission from the FAA as well to launch. You can't be high, you don't be so high, you don't do so many things. So yeah, we want the drones, we absolutely want to use the drones. And the helicopters, like absolute a full multiplier for us, because we can back off and not push that driver, right? And that's the goal of the pursuit, is we want to be able to reduce not only our risk, but risk to everybody else, right?
So I'll just add to that. Yes, we're always kind of working with outside companies, private companies, when they bring their technology. Some of it has to do with Star Chase. Actually, my units was a unit that was working with it. However, that technology, I think, is outdated because the way it worked, you needed 2 minutes for the system to warm up. And then it's a fixed object, it's line of sight. So if the vehicle was not perfectly aligned, it would not hit its target. And as Sergeant Kisa mentioned, we had multiple successful engagements. However, the way we were able to do that was because we have plainclothes officers setting it up. So what we would do, we'd put a plainclothes officer in front of that car and slow it down. So the other car can align and hit the target. What that was creating though is suspects adapt quickly. They knew that something was in their car that would take it off, rip it off, right? So that's a technology that we determine it's not efficient, it's not cost effective, it's not meet our needs. When it comes to the drones, obviously anything that has to do with AI, obviously there's always going to be privacy concerns, right? And we have to, any technology or anything that we want to present, we have to present to like the privacy commission, right? And it has to be approved. But yes, have we been experimenting with drones? Yes. We do have a drone program. However, the drones that we have right now are very limited, meaning they cannot keep up with the speeds of a vehicle. Is that technology out there? Absolutely. There's drones that can go way faster than the drones that we have. We're currently experimenting or finding the possibility of having drones that are set in fixed buildings, or they're going to have the ability to self-deploy. A dispatch call will come in, that goes to our comm center, that gets routed to the drone. Let's say it's a shooting or a shot spotter activation. All that information will come to our comm center. That will have the ability to deploy that drone, self-deploy to come over where the location is. And those are just possibilities that we're exploring right now. The drone program that we have is very limited. I think our technology is a little outdated.
Yeah.
I mean, for what we use it, I mean, it's still effective. I think our number one resource that we have is the helicopter, and obviously we've been talking about the possibility of getting a fixed wing, which means obviously it's a plane in the air. It can be up in the air longer. The cost is like half the price of a helicopter and the maintenance. And it's obviously it pollutes less, less of an impact with the community, and we have the ability to not be detected by the suspects, because one other thing that's been happening, obviously when we make arrests and we write reports, everything goes to discovery, right? We have to provide the reports to defense attorneys, and we have to write our reports. Argus was overhead, right? Meaning the helicopter was following them. So they gotten savvy, and they know that if they see the helicopter, they know they can follow them. So we see them. They're always looking out for the helicopters. So they're adapting to that, to our methods, right? So we just have to be one step ahead. And I agree with you. I think we should leverage technology, but I think anything that we should leverage has to be vetted through the department and obviously through the proper channels.
Well, I'd say as far as the political aspect of it, if the community knows that you need that support, then we can rally that behind you guys, so that way it takes that pressure and load off of you, and it's like, hey, the community demands it. It's not us.
They are working on the IT part of it.
And that way it can become more efficient, more effective.
Well, that's what I think we're hoping with. This is kind of an open dialogue, which we haven't really had a venue for previously, but I mean, all of the things that you're speaking of are things that we've looked at, not necessarily AI, but other technologies that can kind of be where we're not. So they are being explored. There's just, some of the Oakland is just different. So everything we do is a pretty lengthy process, and even with the drones, we're approved to have the drones, but the city, we cannot use city funds to purchase them, which obviously creates a pretty huge thing that we have to overcome for even our current drone program. Not to mention a $3 to $4 million TFR or the 911 response drone. So we're working, and when we're working with the privacy commission, like we're doing all these things, it's just, it does take time, but we are exploring to answer.
So commission needs to pay more attention to that. Maybe we need to create an ad hoc for city policy. Co-sir, Two. And Jane, great.
I have four, so should I ask?
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, so number one is concerning liability issues. Who will be responsible to pay for the pursuit crash when officers are immune from liability, civil liability? Okay, so should I go all in, or you want to do one?
Well, that one doesn't go free. So the city attorney's office handles any of the damage that's created as a result of anything that we do. So that usually goes to the city attorney's office, and then they'll make a determination as far as that.
Okay, so in that case, let's say the officer, chasing, and then the person that drives that being chased got into a car crash. So the crash, after the crash happened, then the police department does not are immune from that. Like they're not. They cannot be.
So the individual officers, yeah, they wouldn't be able to.
So they cannot.
Well, they're usually named anyway, but the city would be the one that's getting the lawsuit.
Okay, sorry. Second question is, what percentage does the pursuit result in death in Oakland?
I wouldn't be able to give you an exact percentage, but it's extremely low. So I know it's 2022.
Like, the numbers were like 3 out of the last 400 or so.
So we had 2021, we had 1, 2022, we had 2, and then the data that he provided in the 3 years is more than 200 pursuits.
Okay.
So it's very, very low.
Okay. And what are the consequences of an officer when they disobey supervisor disapproval to pursue?
It would depend on kind of the circumstances, but just like an officer didn't disengage in time, that can be anything from counseling and training to, some kind of suspension, depending on how egregious it was.
Okay.
I mean, up until termination, there's not a set manual rules violation for that, but there's a bunch of other things that they would be violating, and it just depends on the circumstances.
And my last question is, sometimes when I'm driving and there are people that just don't stop at the red light, they just keep going. Do officer have right? Do officer have the right to pursue when they see that?
No, and it happened to me on the way here. So,
Wait, so you can't pursue.
So we can. So CHP is an agency that will literally chase for anything. They will chase for stuff like that. For us, we usually do not.
Yeah, so that's like a vehicle code violation. That's pretty much, if I was to attempt to stop him and he stops, the two things the officer can do, right? If he just recklessly blew through that red light, something through international, which is really common, then he most likely is going to get a citation because that's part of the high injury network area that we work in. However, if it flees, then no, per our policy, because it's only an infraction according to the vehicle code, we cannot pursue that vehicle.
Okay. The next time I walk across Broadway and don't feel like I'm about to get hit by a car will be the first time.
And it's just, you can think it's very hard to enforce any of the violations when you can't enforce any, when people can just do that in front of us. And then other people will try to intentionally antagonize the officer into attempting to do an enforcement stop and then flee or start doing donuts around them. These are things we've seen on social media, but it happens all the time. And then that can lead to a much more significant incident between the officer and that person.
So there's a number of questions here. I think to some extent, most of them have been addressed to one extent or another. I don't know if there's someone who thinks that their question has not been addressed, who would still like to ask. Go ahead. Come on.
So my question was, and I think you have answered it, but it feels as if, at least anecdotally, based on what I've been reading in the media, that CHP is very limited enforcement actions here in Oakland have resulted in the recovery of far more stolen cars and guns and the arrest of persons who were wanted versus what you reported in your data on pursuits. So this is just pursuits, whereas the CHP appears to just be doing police work and pulling over cars or pursuing them and stopping them and recovering guns, stolen vehicles, and suspects of wanted crimes. So, and like, I know you don't have access to it because I read your name in the paper today and in anticipation of coming here, that you don't have all of that access to the CAP data, but it seems that they're running circles around OPD at this point. I mean, and not out of disrespect, I'm not saying that disrespectful.
No, that's fine.
So the question is about CHP statistics, which look pretty good. So what is Oakland not doing?
So, CHP, Safe Streets Task Force started last August, I believe. I know they started with 3 Adam cars and then a sergeant. They're only working twice a week. I was actually responsible for collecting that data, and then I have provided that data in a couple of meetings that we had with the Police Commission and Council. I know for a fact that CHP's presence has increased. They are going to increase the number of officers going to be out here, Safe Streets and other units. And again, it goes to a pursuit policy, right? CHP has the ability to engage in pursuits for lesser crimes, traffic violations. They can do that. However, we're super limited as to what we can pursue. And I think it goes to the criminal element that is in Oakland. They know about our policies. They know we can't pursue. And I think Sergeant Keys provided an example of that when they're doing caravans and breaking into these businesses, which is a commercial 459, which although it's a felony, it's not a violent felony, but for policy, we cannot pursue those vehicles. And then you think about it, if CHP is authorized to pursue vehicles for lesser crimes, then all of the pursuits are going to go up. The probability of taking somebody into custody or recovering is going to increase. That's just a given.
Yes.
So this is
My second question though was also to the commission. What effort is the commission actually making to interview people who have fled from the CHP or other agencies to understand like what the like how much information they have about these policies and why they're not doing that in Fremont or Danville or wherever?
What I would even say is that this happened last week. There was a car that fled from an OPD unit and then fled from another OPD unit and that was driving recklessly. Our helicopter got overhead. They got it, followed it on the 580. We eventually pulled the helicopter off because it was driving so fast and was driving out of the city. CHP stopped that car with no problem. So people are aware of what our enforcement stance is. It's pretty clear. I mean, you talk to them, they're pretty surprised that there is a resistance.
It's not even necessarily they have to know the policy itself. They have the impression that if they drive fast, they will get away. And it doesn't need to be to the level of knowing that OPD doesn't pursue past a certain speed or there's complications to pursuing past a certain speed. It's just, it can be as simple as the intrinsic knowledge that if I flee in a certain way, OPD will likely not catch me.
Okay, this lady here, and then Adam.
Hi, I would like to know, what are your policy in a community, my community, any community, because Because what's happening is, we get a lot of donuts, speeding, racing. And so when I call or my family call, they said, what color's the car? Did you see the car? And naturally, we're not gonna go out there and look because we're afraid. But we're afraid also because they be driving so fast, we think they're gonna run in our house. So they have hit trees, hit people's fences, there's different accidents. So I wanna know, is that policy the same for the community as well? And what is the speed limit? Or how do you guys come out to help the community? Because are you saying it's 50 miles per hour, but they're going over 50 miles an hour? So how are you gonna do something or catch them? And then you're saying you have to get permission for a supervisor and they're gone. So can someone answer that question, those questions rather?
Yes, I'll do my best. So some of the things that we do proactively to get ahead of what you're talking about, obviously we have multiple ways of taking information, and then that information gets put out. Sometimes we will not necessarily respond that fast because everything goes by a priority of calls, right? What is the number one priority right now? However, that information does get recorded, and the way that we do that is through the CROs, community meetings goal, our CRO will come and gather that information. That information is brought to the commanders. Like, I'm in charge of our motor units, like our motorcycle units. Their number one priority is to reduce fatal collisions in the high injury networks. What we do, we try to deploy them to different areas every day, and that's what they do. They do nothing but enforcement stops.
But there's no, that can be short, but there's no motorcycle guys. I live on 98. And so the officers, however, come out, and we call, the neighbors call, everybody calling, but nobody shows up. So it's constantly happened, 11 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, even in the daytime now. And so besides, shooting the gun, we on the floor scared, praying that they're not gonna come through our door or the car not gonna come through our windows. So nobody comes out. And we, not just me call, but other people call, but nobody shows up.
And I understand your frustration, ma'am, and it goes back to what I was just trying to explain. It's a priority calls. So if you're calling at 4 in the morning because somebody is doing donuts.
Well, it's all through the day now.
Yes, I'm just trying to give you an example, right? And any given, just to give you guys an idea, any given day in East Oakland, we have over 100 calls standing, calls pending for service. We have obviously one officer per beat in addition to specialized units. So the number of calls generated in East Oakland double, sometimes triple what West Oakland is. So we try to send our resources, or concentrate our resources where the need is the highest. However, sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth to address those type of calls, unfortunately, because we have to prioritize those calls. Meaning I have to attend to something that is being active right now, somebody breaking into a house, somebody robbing somebody, somebody shooting somebody. And sometimes those calls just go stale and we don't respond. That is just the reality of things based on the amount of officers that we have right now on the streets. So yeah, that's, I guess, the best way I can explain that.
Yeah, because my girlfriend last Sunday, what they're doing too is they're using the sideshows or whatever, and they broke in Pro Tires. That's on 98. And then my neighbor next door, they broke into her house twice. So it's like they're doing the sideshows, getting away, running, driving fast, or doing their donuts, but instead also they're breaking in people's property or business. And I have a business myself, so I fear that. And I understand what you're saying, but.
That was one of my questions from her daughter.
Okay.
So on Christmas Eve, 2023, Tire Pros on 98th and East 14th, I'll say East 14th International, whatever. There was the biggest sideshow I have had in a very long time. And it took up all of 98, right? And while the sideshow was going, it was a coordinated effort They broke into the Tire Pros, they broke into a nail shop, and a couple other businesses within the area, all at the exact same time. When they broke into Tire Pros, they took a car that was left overnight for service. They took everything that was in that particular business, all the things. And the nail shop was vandalized, a couple others. And so my question that was listed there, at what point does it become another level type of call where you all can actually pursue or take action?
That's a good example of like what I know exactly what you're talking about. That you're talking about New Year's Eve, right, or Christmas Eve?
I believe it was Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve, because I believe that night also that gas station was also vandalized or they broken into. And that's a tactic that the sideshow groups are using. They bring all these 100+ vehicles, they're doing sideshow. They know they can overwhelm us because we don't have that amount of officers to deal with the issue. So what they do, they use sideshow as a distraction, and then they come and break into the businesses. We respond if we know that it's a priority or it's meaning, let's say there's somebody inside that business. Now we're talking about life, right? Instead of property. And that's when we have to coordinate an approach plan, because it is not uncommon that when we're approaching sideshow, that shots are being fired, that vehicles are ramming into our vehicles in an effort to prevent apprehension. So what we don't want is for our officers to respond by themselves, because it's been multiple times where they've been surrounded, they've been injured.
Yeah.
Just the other day, we had one where they pointed a firearm at the officer. And in efforts for us to do assessment, we have to plan it and to properly respond. Unfortunately, sometimes when sideshow shows up at that time at night, we just don't have the resources to deal with it. We do as best we can with the amount of officers that we have, and that could be, I don't know, 10, 12 patrol vehicles versus 100 vehicles plus spectators. So that's kind of the challenges that we're facing.
And what I would add to that is that as sideshow has gotten more and more aggressive and more violent and more destructive, our ability to address it has been more and more restricted outside of our control. So we're trying to find a balance of how we can address it without getting ourselves injured or even the people that we're engaging with, and also protect the public. But it's been a rough balancing act, and there's certain resources that we used to have, or the ability to push them out, that we just don't have, or the ability to stop them from setting up in a particular area. But also their behavior has become way more aggressive than we've seen in years. Because we've always had cars get trapped and maybe get stomped out. The idea of lighting vehicles on fire and crashing them in the car or building and stuff like that, that's not something that we used to see, and it's very difficult to address.
And Millie, and then this gentleman. Lecture.
So I'm really surprised, because there's kind of this whole conversation of dismissiveness to the idea that pursuits are inherently dangerous. And everything that I've read up till now, maybe they weren't academic papers, but it was the San Francisco Chronicle did a very lengthy article looking at pursuits and looking at pursuit policy and what the impact was. San Francisco changed their policy, and within a month, 3 people were injured. They're not dead, but I guarantee you, injuries like that you live with for a very long time. And so maybe you only look at deaths and ignore the fact that there are people who never walk right. And so I do, everything that I've seen has said that pursuits are dangerous. And you know, I think that doesn't mean necessarily we don't want to discuss when it's appropriate to pursue, but when you can't admit that something's dangerous and you're kind of dismissing it, then I don't think we're having a really good conversation. I would also say that at least one of the ways that a lot of people came to learn about the pursuit policy is that officers kept talking about it. Well, we can't do anything. We can't do anything. The number of people who I've heard say, yeah, the officer came, the car was parked, they were robbing the place, and he said, well, I can't do anything. We're like stop the cars right in front of you. And they said, well, I can't do anything. Chief Armstrong used to complain. He used to say he can't get the officers to follow the car to find out if they're gonna stop. So like, it would be really, really helpful to stop advertising, not preventing crime, I think. And that's something that we've seen an awful lot. And maybe it's in an effort to get the policy changed, but I think it's also doing the opposite thing. I think it's a very challenging situation in Oakland where people are coming in from all over. And I understand that. I'm not really trying to dismiss the difficulty of the situation, but I do think that we need to have a broader conversation that's serious and respects the actual injuries that are going to occur if more pursuits are happening. And we have to decide as a community whether we're willing to accept that risk. And we need to have a fuller conversation, in my opinion, not just the pursuit policy, about what are people doing in other communities to address sideshows and to address some of these other issues above and beyond the pursuit policy. And I'm really kind of disappointed that there wasn't more of a conversation, especially around pursuits that talks about the fact, because I just hear a lot of people saying that pursuits are in fact dangerous. And I didn't really hear that tonight. I heard a lot of, we don't know. I think we kind of do.
No, not necessarily. We start our presentation and our first slide says that pursuits are dangerous. And then the sergeant starts talking about risk versus reward, right? And there's a lot that go into this. There's 19 risk factors that we talk to, in addition to the special order that we are constantly assessing as officers and as supervisors. We never said that pursuits are not dangerous.
That's what you want to change. You said this is the way it is and we want to change this.
No, that's not what I said.
No.
I'm sorry if you misheard me, but that's not what the presentation is about. Our goal here today obviously is to share with the community, this is our policy, this is our restrictions, and then collect the information that we receive from the community, right? And then bring it back to our executive team saying, this is the concerns of the community when it comes to our pursuit policy. But we're here to present facts, and the facts are that the presentation that Sergeant gave, he took that information straight from the Oakland Police Department, Department General Order J4. And that's pretty much it.
And pursuits, we have never said pursuits are not dangerous. Pursuits are inherently dangerous. The longer they go, the more likely it is to end in a crash. That is never, we will never ever say that pursuits, like, yeah, let's just go do them and chase for anything. When I started in 2001, we had a very limited pursuit policy, and I could pretty much chase whatever I wanted, right? In 2007, we updated our policy to reasonable suspicion of a crime or a DUI driver driving recklessly. Well, then I inherently take danger in pursuing that vehicle. I know he's under the influence, and now I'm going to pursue him. Right now, I'm adding to the risk because they can't drive without being pursued, and now they're fleeing from me and they're under the influence, right? So we stopped that. In 2008, we stopped that. I'm sorry, 2013, we stopped that. When Chief Tucker took over, he brought it back to, we can chase whatever we want. And again, not necessarily what we need to have that balance. And we have to have it, because how do I come to you and your family and say, you know what, they were fleeing from a burglary of a house or a locked auto or whatever, but in an attempt to catch them, I've seriously injured, maimed, or actually killed your family member. And that's what we as a department have to weigh. So what we need from the community is exactly what you're saying, Ms. James, is what are we willing to accept? What are we willing to accept as a community, as a department, as a risk to have this, to pursue, right? And that's what we're after. So we really need the community input as to what you're willing to accept and what we can do as a department. I hope that helps.
Okay, Millie, and then this gentleman, and then the.
Hey, his hat has been waiting here.
Gentleman on the left.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam. I'm a commissioner on the Violence Prevention and Safety Services Commission and the Community Policing Advisory Board. I've been hearing about some of our restrictions around these police chases, and I guess I'm a little confused because the governor, the commissioner of the CHP, the mayor, Councilman Reed, Councilman Jenkins, all support aggressive changes to the pursuit policy. In fact, City Council actually passed Resolution 94257 to direct the police commission to review Special Order 9192 and the Department General Order J04. Furthermore, the Oakland Police Officer Association said the Oakland Police Officer Association appreciates the governor's recognition of challenging policies in the space which are not aligned with industry standards and our ability to effectively serve our community. My question is, are these policies pursuits to protect the public or the criminals? Because they are aware of what our policies are and are profiting from. So I want to know what the opinions of the police commission and our police captains here of what these pursuits policies are in place. I want to know your opinions, not just what the policies say, but your opinions.
Well, we will be reporting back to the full commission from this ad hoc, and then that report will be voted on at the commission to then go through to the council. The commission, the council members who I've talked to, most of them are actually want us to review, but are not pushing us to go in one particular direction or another. The governor may want us to go in a particular direction. Even the mayor may want us to go in a particular direction, but they're running for office and they're looking for money and they're looking for support. That's not what the commission is doing. The commission is looking at the facts and this balancing that has been described here between the dangers of pursuit to people in the community and the need to find criminals when there are other ways of doing that, when there may be even other ways of catching people who are trying to run away. And we're trying to find ways to do that without increasing the dangers of actually hurting innocent people. That's what we're about. That's what we're looking for. That's why we're having this hearing, this forum.
But the thing is, it doesn't seem like there's a strong deterrent to crime, right? And there needs to be a deterrent. And from what you have told me, yes, you're looking at the facts, but I hear some sort of bias as if you're not looking towards increasing pursuits. In fact, you're looking at different ways to work around pursuits and catch criminals in alternative ways, which is great. But the simple fact is, criminals are aware of our pursuit policy and are profiting from it. And there needs to be a strong deterrent to committing these crimes in the city of Oakland.
Well, we want to look at the facts as to whether that's true rather than that's what somebody thinks. Here's a copy of the Community-Oriented Policing Service and the Police Executive Research Forum, who are making recommendations for vehicle pursuit policies, a guide for law enforcement executives on managing the associated risk. One of the myths that they speak to here is that more restrictive policies actually result in more crime. That's a myth. That's not fact. So we want to go on the basis of fact, not myths or political points of positions from the mayor or from the governor.
Commissioner Riles, Commissioner Ricardo Garcia would like to speak. His hand is up too.
Sure.
Yes, thank you for that response, Commissioner Riles. I echo your sentiments in that our job is to look at the data, the facts, and to really hear community concerns, to hear from OPD if there are, and it relates to my question, if there are certain administrative and or things that are in the moment that's happening, or there are certain things that are happening that's restricting them from being able to stop, these criminals when there's criminal action taking place, and if there's tangible changes that we can actually make that are significant, not only to allow OPD to best do their job, but also to be able to message to the public and to the community that there are certain changes that are going to allow for folks to be able to do their jobs in a more efficient way. And if it's determined, and what I'm curious about, and what I'm hearing from the public as well, and is that there's something that happens in that interaction when possibly just a moving violation or an infraction's happening, all the way to maybe even like reckless driving and sideshowing, that type of criminal behavior, or breaking into a property, or somebody getting hit or flying off a car while something's happening. And when that is happening directly in front of OPD and a cop, I love the fact that there's 19 risk factors that folks are getting trained on. I hope that there's training happening for that. And so that those things are being processed in the moment rather quickly. But what I'm trying to understand, and I think the general public and the community is trying to understand, is what happens in that interaction that goes from a stop and stopping somebody to a pursuit. Folks aren't just driving 50 miles an hour immediately, right? And so in that moment, what's happening and what can we do to deter people from taking off in the first place? And to also have the community, because the community adapts. Young folks, the internet age now, folks understand where those loopholes are, or what they could get away with, what they can't get away with, and how we could close those without over criminalizing our community, without going back to, pre-tech stops, and still being able to try to make sure that everything is being accounted for, but at the same time, making any tangible changes and identifying if there is an opportunity to do that in that moment. And so I think that's the part that I'm still trying to understand. And I don't know if folks in the audience are still, and there are several questions alluding to that, and I don't know if they've gotten those answers yet, but definitely would like to learn and look further into that as to what is happening in that moment that deters a cop from hitting the lights and attempting to at least arrest somebody and determining whether they're going to take off or not, which would then kick in this policy. So I think what's happening in the community is that there's a gap there that folks could take off, right? And we know that, and we hear that in the community. We hear that from law enforcement, that that's the case. And so we're trying to figure out how we can deter that. And that's what's being publicized. That's what's in the news. That's why everybody's getting involved in what's happening here in Oakland. And it's a bad look. And so we have to deal with it. But at the same time, we don't want to put the public in further jeopardy, and we don't want to over criminalize our young people or communities of color that are already being over criminalized. So I'll just leave it at that for now. But yeah, thank you.
What I would say is, obviously it's complicated, but our goal isn't necessarily to increase pursuits. It's our ability to provide some kind of accountability within the community to make it safer. Whether that void is filled with technology, whether it's our air support or whatever other resources we need, that's what we're looking for. What we've kind of lost is that the initial ability to initiate the stop, initiate a pursuit, and then pass it off to that. So we don't want pursuits to increase. Like, anybody who's involved in pursuit, it looks like it's fun on TV. It's not fun in real life. It gets, especially when it gets really hazardous. So we're not necessarily looking, can we get more pursuits, but can we make it possible for us to try to get some kind of accountability? And if that involves a few more pursuits or different techniques that we're using them, that's what we're looking to do. And I think we also, it's all about what the community wants. And I think that's what is great about what we're doing here today, is getting a feel for how far do we want to take? What does the community actually want? Because we can see things on social media, we can hear what politicians say, but we need to have that and then involvement past just this one. But when we're having full police commission meetings, or when we're going to City Hall, that's the kind of involvement that we would look for. So I guess we know that it's dangerous. I don't think that it's a secret to us that it's dangerous. We don't try to understate that, but we need to be able to do something, because what we're doing now doesn't seem to be working. And we do see with CHP, they have a different approach and they're having different results. And we take pride in working in the city. It actually extremely bothers me that we can't provide the services that people want, and we have to call on somebody from outside to do that. But how do we get there? How do we get to that point? That's what we have to do as a group together, and not this fractured approach that we've seen in the past.
I just wanna, since you want a community response, I got an interesting text. While I've been here, a friend of mine was texting me and I said, I'm at the police commission, we're talking about the pursuit policy. He says, interesting, I just witnessed one on Lakeshore earlier today. It was totally insane. I'm sorry. Call when you're done, I'll fill you in. I said, what happened? I'll bring it up. Yes, both the police and the runner were very reckless. Someone could have been easily killed or severely injured, if not both. The police were easily at 30 seconds behind the runner. Traffic was moderate. The runner made it all the way to Mandana before the two police vehicles made it to the light in front of Pete's. They weren't able to visibly see where the runner went. They may have been communicating on the radio, but they did not exercise any safety precautions in regard to public, in my opinion. Me, do you know if it was OPD or CHP? It was clearly OPD. It was at 2:40 in the afternoon.
Yes, sir. And then
Well, you said I was first one.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. I know we only got a little time.
Yeah.
I looked at a slide, we were talking about data, and it said, and I quote, no research exists as to the benefits or cost of restricting pursuit policies. So it's making me wonder about what data went into implementing this policy if there is no data to begin with.
So, I can kind of comment on that very broadly. So in general, these policies tend to be written, to be very blunt about it, these policies tend to be written based on what the most recent event in the news is. So if, in the case of Oakland's policy, it was written after two people died in a pursuit, all of a sudden, the special order comes in place limiting pursuits. San Francisco has a slate, or has this big concern about commercial robbery. What do? They pass a ballot measure that makes it so that they can pursue commercial robberies. So it tends to not be based on like an actual cost benefit analysis of pursuits, and even necessarily how those pursuit policy changes will impact the or how they will impact the community in a big way. They tend to be, frankly, the result of responses to news stories and what the public's concern is at the time. And it's unfortunate that a lot of policy ends up written that way, both in policing and outside of policing. It is a direct response to the effects or the perceived effects of the old policy, that you write a new policy that then has its own effects, that then later on gets rewritten again, because the effects of those all of a sudden become the thing that you are concerned about.
Okay, and just to finish, thank you for answering. As a community member on 81st Ave, it's been absolute hell. It's been open for 40 years, and I've never witnessed it like this. And social media shows officers not doing anything. They're supposed to follow the policy to keep and protect their jobs. I totally get it now. So I would love to see more pursuits as a community member. There's no data that says that we shouldn't do more pursuits, according to what I read. And it has been absolute hell, to the point where I'm rethinking my career choices. Like, okay, I need to move. I need to buy $1 million home outside of Oakland, because it is hell, and I would love to use profanity, but I'm not. So
I want to speak on the lack of data thing. To be very clear, like the officers all said, pursuits are something we broadly don't want. They are dangerous, but also, you know, a suspect fleeing in general is dangerous. What the suspects are doing is dangerous. And where that lack of data really comes in is that kind of cost benefit. There is, I think, like basically everybody can agree. There is a point where it becomes kind of obvious that the danger of a pursuit is not worth it. You should not be engaging in a 15-minute pursuit to catch somebody who is going 15 miles an hour over the speed. Like, that's crazy. It is, but there is no data on like where that limit may be, and there's no data on what the like upside of pursuits are relative to that downside, which I think is like a very important question. And it gets at kind of the core of the discussion around pursuits, which is like exactly how dangerous they are, because just saying they're dangerous is like a vague thing. A lot of things in life are dangerous, and there's very different levels of danger. And what are the officers making the right decisions on avoiding that danger? And at what point should the policy cut officers off pretty much entirely? At what point should it allow more discretion? That ends up being this massive gray area where, like I said, basically no research exists.
That's specific to that area. I think when there's a lack of accountability in any realm of the world, whether it's in our department, whether it's in the community, that's where we start having issues like that, where officers, I used to work dog watch, I used to spend a lot of time around 85 International. I've been involved in pursuits at 85 International. That area has changed so much in the time, even from when I was out there at the sergeant. And it does feel very difficult to address it, because at every step, whether you're trying to contact people in front, whether you're trying to dissuade people from dealing drugs, whether you're trying to do any of these things, pursuit's not necessarily the answer for most of those issues, but a lot of it is just this idea that there's a lack of accountability in certain places where you can get away with basically anything. And that's what we want to change. It's just how do we get there? And in reality, the only way we can get there is together, whether it's pursuits, whether it's like people doing stops, how we do our job, we need to have buy-in from the community and from the city in order to be effective. So I feel your pain as much as I can, but yes, we hear it, we see it, we hear it, we're trying to find different ways. We're just trying to be more creative how we can get to that.
Okay, we're gonna have to be out of here in about 10 minutes. I'm gonna take 3 more questions. This gentleman's here.
And also, there are trade-offs, but there needs to be deterrence and there needs to be consequences. Because you're saying the word accountability. But you know, the trade-offs when you're looking at, you might injure someone might get killed who's innocent in the process, but that person that you caught may be a murderer who was gonna go off and kill 10 other people or do all this other damage. And the thing is like the gentleman mentioned, it's like they know the game and they're playing it, and they're not necessarily each individual, but their handlers know. And they tell them, do this, this, and this, and you're gonna get away with it. And they're recruiting the younger, the juveniles, the underage, the minors, and they're sending them, they're point and shoot and sending them out to commit all this crime. And all this stuff is going on. And I know you bring out this, publication and everything. I trust the streets and I trust what the people are saying, because they are there 24/7. And like the gentleman said, 40 plus years. Everyone we talk to says it's never been this bad ever, ever. And yet you have the administration and say, oh, crime is down. No, reporting of crime is down. Reporting of crime is down because you see what's going on here. And so that's why Tao is under recall. That's why Price is under recall, because we're sick and tired of administration not doing their job, not listening to the people, and not doing something to generate the results. And if there's no consequences, it gets worse. And that's what's happening. That's what we see. On another point, just a simple no tech before pursuing. What about vehicles, limo tint all the way around, no license plate? That's the start. I used to work for Palo Alto PD in crime prevention. traffic enforcement prevents everything else from going sour. And these folks, they get nervous and then, they go to take off. If you catch them before they do the pursuit, then suspicious circumstances and everything else, it's there, there's answers there. We just need to apply them to get the results that's needed to turn this crime wave around. So, back to you.
How you guys doing today? Thank you, for your service. My question to you is, because everybody knows that we need to have pursuit. My question is, what do you guys need to keep you guys safe? Because you guys are ultimately risking your lives, and your family might be devastated by your loss as well. Also, the community. You had a limited amount of funding. What can you guys do? Again, my name is Andre Sanford, and I'm a candidate for state assembly. So I would love to know what you guys need.
I mean, the biggest game changer that we could get is, we've looked into the fixed wing. This has been something I think like 2 years, maybe more in the making. The ability to have air for as long as we can have it in the air is the best tool that we have, whether it's vehicles that we would normally be.
Fixed wing.
Fixed wing airplane, sorry. Fixed wing or rotary wing. But the fixed wing has less of an effect on our communities because it's not as loud. It can fly at a higher altitude. There's different things. And it can stay in the air longer, which is the biggest benefit for us. And using that.
When you say fixed wing, the drone? Or?
No, it's a fixed wing aircraft. Well, in theory, it could be a drone or an aircraft. But being able to have something overhead, so when a vehicle does flee from you trying to stop them at a red light, or for blowing a red light and they take off, that aircraft can then stay with that vehicle. So that will mitigate the need for the pursuit in the first place, especially for vehicles that we wouldn't normally be able to pursue. So having air and a different technology to keep eyes in areas that we can't be or we can't stay with the vehicle, that's the greatest benefit. And that keeps officers out of more of the riskier situations, and it keeps the community safer without having as many high-speed pursuits.
What do you think? Would you say you need 1 or 2 or 3 fixed wing?
So I would add to this. We need technology. We need to leverage technology. However, you need manpower to manage that technology, meaning what good is an aircraft in the air if I don't have officers to take action? That's the biggest challenge that we're facing. We're seeing a high, really low on police officers. I think our numbers are. So we have 700 officers. Out of those 700, I believe about 80 are not on the streets. We for multiple reasons. So that really impacts our ability to deploy officers in the streets. Every officer in the Oakland Police Department, I would say, because I supervise a lot of these guys, they work very, very hard, and they're passionate about their job, and they believe in something. They buy into the mission of the Oakland Police Department, which is to reduce crime and provide a better way of living for the community. They do, because they come in day out in the job. If you're asking me what do we need more police officers and we need more technology. Have the ability to do our jobs, and then obviously we need the buy-in from the community. We need to hear from you guys. What is it that how do you guys want to be police as a community? Like, what are you guys willing to accept when it comes to taking risks, right? Because you guys are the community. We work for you guys. Policies are created because to obviously keep the community safe, everybody safe. Okay, we need your input. This is perfect right here. Listen to what you guys want, right? Because you guys live here, you guys are seeing it every day, day in, day out, and this is a great start right here.
Okay, this is the last question, then they're closing in 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Quickly, please.
So you mentioned wanting to buy in from the community. I attended an event, Mr. Feck, the rapper from Oakland, took thug therapy and put his neck on the line and opened up for the police department to come in. There were over 100 community members at that particular event. No police officers from any of the invited police departments showed up. The community showed up. They were willing and ready to have the conversation, a very difficult and hard conversation, but we were willing to engage. over 100 community members. A couple of, Chief Laron Armstrong, former chief, he was there. Lauren Taylor, he was there. You were there, sir, in the corner. So there are these opportunities happening where you can engage community on a larger scale. It was just unfortunate that that opportunity was missed. It unfortunately left everyone who was there with a bad taste in their mouth in regards to the police department. So, all of that to say, it would be great if opportunities like that, there was a bit more engagement. Like tonight, I was expecting a larger turnout, hoping for, but the way that this was communicated and put out was quite limited. So I would appreciate if there was even more engagement with the communities. Oakland is community organization heavy. There are people out here doing the work, willing to do the work, and willing to engage. But what we're seeing is police, even ODOT, wanting to engage on their terms and their time. Sometimes you have to go out to the community to engage instead of always expecting the community to come to you. That's all I'm saying. But let it be known, if you want to get with Mr. Fab, so you guys can get something going, because all the people that were there were ready. He still had the event. He had to pivot. Chief Laron Armstrong did the best that he could. And the other people that were there as well on the panel. Lines of people.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We're gonna have to get out of here because they're gonna lock the doors. They're leaving right now. We appreciate all of you being here. And we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Become a member of